you get these projects into Eclipse, just do an import. There's a file import option on Eclipse. Bring in minimally the storage for API for Android project, the access control for Android project, and then you probably also want to bring in the sample app just so you know how to work with both of those storage and access control APIs. Again, additional imports for things like the ACS sample application. In other words, if you're going to do ACS type of access, the more complex form of authentication, you'll also want to bring that in. And the unit test projects to do any unit testing of the actual Windows Azure Toolkit for Android API. Hopefully the application have already been unit tested by Microsoft and others, but if you're running into a problem, you might want to bring that project in as well. You'll see actually when you download things from Git, you'll point Eclipse out to the folder you've downloaded things to, and you actually see, again, 6 projects you can import. Minimally want the storage, minimally want access control, and probably the sample app. The others, I would say, are optional based on what your needs are. One thing to note, there are some minor fixes in the project you'll probably have to get set up when you import them. For example, the project probably won't know what your class paths are, in other words, where you put things in your file system. It won't know exactly what version of Android SDK you're using, and usually the references between the libraries are not correct. And so there's actually some troubleshooting guides in the documentation. Again, they're minimal, but most of them will help you to kind of work through some of those issues. And if you really are experiencing some issues with getting these projects in place, again, use my email to send me a note, and I'll see if I can't help you out a bit too. Once you've done a little bit of development here, it's not too hard to get these projects up and running. Additionally, what you're going to need, if you're not going to do direct access to storage, is the CloudReady packages for devices. These are, again, Microsoft provided, free of charge, open source technology, at least in terms of being able to use it. They don't give you the source code for these, but being able to use them, they're out there and available, again, off of GitHub. So these provide, again, the authentication membership and ACS service packages. In other words, those pieces that are actually going to run as services inside of the Microsoft Azure cloud that allows your Android device to get access to storage. Again, not necessary if you're going to do direct access, which is not a recommended approach by Microsoft or most people who do development. These are designed to help make life a lot easier for you. In other words, otherwise you'd have to actually build some sort of proxy service in the cloud yourself to grant access to applications into your storage. Don't want to have to do that. That's a lot of work that's not necessary. These packages are already provided. All you have to do is configure these. In fact, what Microsoft does is actually provide these service packages in various forms, from extra large to extra small VM sizes. For those who know, again, Windows Azure, you're familiar with those terms. For those who are not, the idea is anytime you have something running in Windows Azure, you may want it to run in a very large and able to scale to tremendous numbers kind of way, or you may just have a few users, in which case you don't want to be occupying lots of storage space and using lots of CPU time. You're going to get charged for that, and so therefore the CloudReady packages come in various forms to meet your particular needs. Again, you get these from a GitHub site, which I've got listed here. Once you get that CloudReady package download, how do you get it set up? You have to actually create a new hosted service inside of either the management portal or using the service management tools provided by Windows Azure. Again, I'm going to assume most of you have done that kind of work already. If you haven't, there's plenty of documentation out there. In fact, some old talks here inside of the Azure group for how to do that. Create a new hosted service. Don't deploy anything yet. Just set up a new hosted service. You'll also have to set up and deploy a certificate. You can do one that is self-signed, but I will tell you there are some devices that when they communicate with your hosted service, if it's using a self-signed certificate, might have problems with that. In other words, the devices today aren't really set up to acknowledge those kinds of messages you get through your browser about, there's a warning that this is not a signed certificate, or you're still okay with that. So it's much better to actually get a certificate authority signed certificate. And then you also have to worry about setting up things like domain names and DNS routing, because the URLs that you have in the cloud aren't going to be directly accessible from your application's perspective. What I highly recommend is using DNS Azure to help negotiate that a bit. DNS Azure will allow you to do some DNS routing to your actual cloud-based applications. Just get a domain name, register through DNS Azure, and it'll take care of the rest. So it makes using a certificate from a signed CA, much easier to work with. Once you've got your hosted service ready. You've got the deployment ready from a certificate perspective. You do also need to go into the actual CloudReady package and make some service configuration changes. I'll show you those here in just a second. And then just deploy the service. So again, no coding necessary except for the small little configuration changes, which I'm going to show you. From configuration changes, what are we talking about? Well, you have to tell the CloudReady package what your actual storage account is. So you have to go into the service config file, the CSCFG file, change the account name to your account name, and you also have to provide it with the credentials, your actual keys and certificates that allow the storage service to access your actual storage accounts. Obviously, this is the connection point. Your Android device will talk to the service, not knowing account information, but your service will now talk to storage and lateral the communication about that this user is okay, and it will have all the information necessary to allow it to access the actual storage account for you. So some indirection here is what allows this whole system to work. That's all there is to set up the CloudReady system. Once you've done that and you've got your application deployed, this CloudReady application deployed, you can go out to a browser, HTTPS, again, we're dealing with secure forms of communication here. So HTTPS, whatever you've decided to call your CloudReady service provided by Microsoft, but in your own hosted environment, .cloud.app. And what you'll see is a page that actually comes up that looks like what you see here on the screen. This is a membership capability, again, allowing you to set up users or users to register themselves and set up their access from Android now into your storage devices. Again, to set up ECS is a bit more complex, so I'm not going to spend our time today on that. That does take a bit more work, but a similar process, setting up that CloudReady ECS control mechanism is very similar. One key difference is you also have to point that CloudReady service off to the identity namespaces where users are actually getting their authentication, again, through something like Facebook, Windows Live ID, things of that nature. Once you've got the CloudReady service up and running, and once you've downloaded and gotten the Windows Azure for Android toolkit up and running, now you're ready to test things out. And thankfully, again, Microsoft has provided a sample application that actually allows you to do this. The sample application will actually go through things like looking at your table storage, looking at your queue storage, and all the rest. We'll actually see that here in just a second. So a marvelous application to make sure that you can see if everything is up and running correctly, and then also providing good sample code, which you can actually use as a basis for developing your Android apps. How do you actually get the Windows Android sample app up and running? Simply go out and bring in, again, the Windows Azure for Android sample application, and then you'll have to configure it to point it now to your CloudReady application, unless you're using direct access. Again, you're using direct access, you have to go into this Android app and tell it what your account key and IDs are. If, however, you're going to use the CloudReady services, you simply point it to the URL for those CloudReady services. And where do you do that? You do that through actually a resource file, an Android resource file. There's something called a strings XML file out there, which allows you to find all resources that your Android app is going to use. And you specify things like the connection type, whether it's CloudReady Simple for direct access, or direct for direct access, or CloudReady Simple for membership service. You provide it the properties to connect correctly to the Windows Azure environment, and away you go. No other coding necessary. So direct access, provide an account name, an access key for something like membership service, and go out and provide it the actual URL to your proxy service, again, to your membership CloudReady service out there. Again, ACS access a bit more complex, and I'm not going to go into that today, but similar configuration is required. Once you've got that ready, you simply run the application just like I ran Hello World. To give you a sample of that, let me bring up my desktop, and I'll show you what the Windows Azure for Android sample application actually looks like. So let me actually just share, I can just share here my DVD again, my virtual device. And I'll pop out of our Hello World application and pop into the Azure Storage Client. When it comes up, as you can see here on my screen, it allows you to suggest whether or not you're going to be using the actual proxy service. Again, in this case, the storage client is going to be using the membership service, so you have to have a username and password set up, which I've already done. Or I could turn that off, in which case now it's going to go direct access, and I've already built into my Android sample app here my key and my ID to access my Windows Azure account. I'm going to go and use the proxy service first off. So I'll turn that off, And here you can see already it is using the Windows Azure for Android API to now go out and provide me an application that allows me to access, for example, Windows Azure table storage. And by default, the way this works, it just brings up all tables that are available to me. For example, I created this foobar table out in Windows Azure table storage before our demonstration day, so I can go out and look at all the records inside of that particular table. And in fact, I can actually go out and add a record. So you do this in a standard fashion. For those of you who are not familiar with Windows Azure, there's a Windows Azure storage, I should say. There's a key and a partition that essentially provide the index to our particular data. So I'll put a key in here, I don't know, something like ABC, and provide a row 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Timestamp will let be default, and X and Y and data, and go ahead and add that. And if we looked at again at foobar, we'd see new row data provided. Again, access to table storage is provided, blob storage, again, any kind of bits and bytes you want to put out there inside of Azure, as well as queue storage. So the Android application, the sample application, already been built. All it allows you to access your storage, again, either directly or through those CloudReady services, either through a membership service or an ACS service. Don't have to do anything other than configure these to get these up and running. Now, obviously, here the UI is pretty rough, but the idea is it allows you to see how access can be accomplished and to make sure, obviously, your environments are all set up correctly.